Welcome to part 2 of Saint John Bosco's dream, the Life-saving Raft. And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'd recommend clicking on the link I've put in the description below. You're watching The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Don Bosco continued telling his dream to the oratory boys. He said, "I stood at the foot of a tall mast at the center of the raft, surrounded by many boys, priests, and clerics who carried out my orders. As long as they were docile and obedient to my words, all was well and we were quiet, content, and secure. But quite a few began to find the raft uncomfortable, and they feared the voyage was too long. They complained about the dangers, discomforts, inconveniences, and argued about where we would land. They wondered how we would find another refuge and deluded themselves with the hope that not far away we would land and find safe shelter. Still others worried that they would soon run out of provisions. In short, they began to question everything and refused to obey. I tried to persuade them with various reasons, but my efforts were in vain. Other rafts appeared that seemed to be following a different course from ours. The imprudent boys resolved to turn away from me and have their way. They threw some planks they found in our raft into the waters. Upon discovering more fairly wide planks floating nearby, they jumped on them and departed for the other rafts that had appeared. That scene was indescribably painful for me to see those unfortunate boys heading for their ruin. The wind was blowing and the waves were agitated. Behold, some of the boys sank beneath the waves, rising and falling furiously. Others were enveloped in the whirlpools and dragged into the abyss. Others bumped into obstacles at the water's edge, where they capsized and disappeared. Several managed to reach the other rafts, but those sank before long. The night grew dark and gloomy, and in the distance we heard the heart-rending cries of those who ultimately perished. Because all were shipwrecked, I thought of these words: "In the sea of this world, all shall perish who are not aboard this ship, Our Lady's ship, that is, the ship of Mary Most Holy." The number of my dear children was significantly reduced. Nevertheless, we continued to trust in Our Lady. After the dark night, the ship finally entered a very narrow strait between two muddy shores covered with bush, large rocks, pebbles, poles, firewood, broken planks, masts, and oars. We could see tarantulas, toads, snakes, dragons, crocodiles, sharks, vipers, and 1,000 other filthy animals around the boat. Above were weeping willows, the branches of which hung over our boat. Above the willows stood large cats, chewing pieces from human limbs. Many ape-like creatures hung from the branches and tried to touch and snatch the boys, but the boys squatted low and dodged those snares. Here we saw with horror the poor companions who had been lost or deserted us. After their shipwrecks, the waves had thrown them upon that beach. Some limbs had been torn to pieces by the most violent impact against the rocks. Others were buried in the marsh, where only their hair and half an arm could be seen, and someone's back protruded from the mud farther on. Elsewhere, some corpses floated entirely visible. Suddenly, a young man from the boat cried out, "Here is a monster devouring the flesh of so-and-so." He repeatedly called that wretch by his name, pointing him out to his bewildered companions. Another spectacle presented itself to our eyes. A short distance away rose a gigantic furnace in which a great fire was blazing. Human forms appeared among the flames. We could see feet, legs, arms, hands, and heads now rising and then descending in those flames in the same chaotic manner as a pot of stew when it boils. Observing this ghastly sight, we saw many of our pupils and were startled. Above that fire was a great lid on which were written these words in large letters: the 6th and 7th commandments. Nearby, we saw a vast, tall outcrop of land with numerous haphazardly growing trees. Many of our young men were still moving, having either fallen into the waves or strayed on purpose during our voyage. I went ashore, paying no heed to the danger. I approached and saw that they had their eyes, ears, hair, and even their hearts filled with insects and filthy worms, which were gnawing at them, causing them great pain. One of the young men suffered more than the others. I wanted to approach him, but he fled from me by hiding behind the trees. I saw others who opened their shirts and showed their bodies were wrapped with snakes. Others had vipers on their chests. I pointed them all to a spring from which fresh, abundant mineral water poured. Whoever went to wash in it was healed instantly and was able to return to the boat. Most of those unfortunate ones obeyed my invitation, but some refused. I ended my appeal to them and turned to those who had been healed. Then they followed me confidently at my urging, and the monsters all withdrew. Then, as soon as we reboarded the raft, we were propelled by the wind, and it exited that strait and soared into a boundless ocean. Mourning the sad fate of our companions, we began to sing the hymn, "Praise Mary, O Faithful Tongues," in thanksgiving to the great Heavenly Mother for having protected us until that moment. As though by Our Lady's command, the raging of the wind miraculously ceased, and the ship began to glide swiftly over the calm waves with an ease I can't describe. The raft seemed to move forward at the mere encouragement that the young men jokingly gave it by pushing back the water with the palms of their hands. A rainbow appeared in the sky, more marvelous and varied than the aurora borealis. Passing by, we read the word Meduum, written in large letters of light, but we didn't understand its meaning. It seemed to me that each letter was the initial of these words, Mater et Domina omnis universi Maria, that is, Mary, Mother and Mistress of the whole universe. After a long stretch of the journey, land appeared. Little by little, as we approached, we felt an inexpressible joy in our hearts. With its groves of trees, that land presented the most enchanting panorama one could imagine after that terrifying journey. It was illuminated as if the light of the rising sun shone behind its hills. It was a light like that of a beautiful summer evening. It instilled in us a sense of rest and peace. Finally, the raft bumped against the sands of the shore. Then the raft halted at the foot of a beautiful vineyard. We could say this about that raft, "O God, you gave us a bridge to enable us to cross the ground swells of this world and reach your safe harbor." The young men were eager to enter into that vineyard. Some, who were more curious than others, leaped onto that shore. But after just a few steps, they remembered the unfortunate fate that befell those first ones who fell in love with the previous land that emerged in the middle of the stormy sea. So they hastily returned to the boat. Everyone's eyes turned to me. The wrinkled forehead of each asked the question, "Don Bosco, is it time to descend and stop?" I thought for a while and then said to them, "Let us descend. The time has come. Now we're safe." There was a general shout of joy. Each one wrung his hands in contentment and entered the vineyard. From the vines hung clusters of grapes like those found in the Promised Land, and on the trees grew every kind of fruit that one can desire. A great castle surrounded by a delightful regal garden and strong walls sat in the middle of that vast vineyard. We went to visit it and were granted entry. We were tired and hungry. In a large hall in the castle, all decorated with gold, a great table was set for us with the most exquisite foods to which everyone could help himself as he pleased. As we finished our refreshments, a noble servant entered the hall who was richly dressed of indescribable beauty. He greeted us with affectionate and familiar courtesy, calling us all by name. Seeing us astonished and amazed at his beauty and the magnificence of everything we had already seen, he said, "This is nothing. Come and see." We followed him. He showed us the gardens from the balconies, explaining that those were for our recreation. He led us from hall to hall, each more magnificent than the previous in its architecture, with colonnades and ornaments of every kind. He then opened a door leading into a chapel and invited us to enter. From the outside, the chapel looked small, but as soon as we crossed its threshold, we saw it was so large that we could barely see one another from one end to the other. The floor, the walls, and the vaults were rich with admirable decorations of marble, silver, gold, and precious stones. I was so ecstatic with wonder that I exclaimed, "But this is the beauty of paradise! I could remain here forever." So what did this dream mean? Please join us on Friday for part 3 of the dream, where all of this will be explained. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.